At 4:50 in the morning on February 21, 1943, Brigadier General Paul Robinette stood inside a shallow wadi 20 miles east of Tebessa, Tunisia, staring across the dim desert as the first hints of dawn glowed over the horizon. Before him, German panzers were massing in the cold pre-sunrise air, preparing for an attack he knew would come within hours. Those tanks belonged to General Feld Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, the commander who had humiliated British armies across North Africa for 2 relentless years. Only days before, Rommel had smashed American forces at Kasserine Pass, tearing through the green, untested units as if they were paper. Now he was coming for Tebessa, the main Allied supply base in western Tunisia. If Rommel captured it, he would cut off thousands of American troops and seize enough fuel and ammunition to keep the Afrika Korps fighting for months. Robinette commanded Combat Command B of the U.S. 1st Armored Division. He had 48 Sherman tanks, 31 tank destroyers, 3 infantry battalions, and 11 artillery batteries. Rommel was bringing the 10th Panzer Division, elements of the 21st Panzer Division, and the Italian Centauro Armored Division, nearly 120 tanks supported by mechanized infantry and artillery. The numbers were close. The experience was not. Rommel's veterans had been fighting for 2 years in Libya and Egypt. They had won at Gazala, taken Tobruk, and survived 100 smaller clashes. They understood the desert, mobile warfare, combined arms, and coordination between tanks, infantry, and artillery in ways that shattered British formations again and again. The Americans had been in combat for exactly 9 days. Most had not even seen a German soldier before February 14th. Most had never been shelled by artillery. Most had never watched a friend die. Rommel knew this. 3 days before the offensive began, he wrote in his journal that the Americans were untested, poorly led, and would break easily. German intelligence agreed. American units were disorganized, their commanders inexperienced, their equipment adequate but clumsily used. The Germans expected another easy victory. They had been right, for 72 hours. But now they were about to be proven wrong. The first American formation Rommel destroyed was Combat Command A of the 1st Armored Division at Sidi Bou Zid on February 14th. At dawn, German armor struck from 2 directions, bypassing American infantry on 3 isolated hills. The infantry was too far apart to support each other. The Germans surrounded them, cut them off, and pushed into the valley where American tanks waited. The American tank crews had trained hard. They knew the textbook. Spread out. Take hull-down positions. Coordinate with infantry and artillery. Fight methodically. The problem was doctrine. American training in early 1943 insisted that tanks should fight tanks. Infantry handled infantry. Artillery suppressed artillery. Tank destroyers hunted enemy armored breakthroughs. But German doctrine fused everything. Their tanks worked with their infantry. Their infantry worked with their artillery. Everything moved as one, attacked as one, supported as one. So at Sidi Bou Zid, American tanks fought alone. Infantry was stuck on the hills. Artillery was too far behind. Tank destroyers were scattered and isolated. When the German 21st Panzer Division struck from the north and Italian Centauro armor hit from the south, they converged with perfect coordination. Combat Command A fought bravely for hours, knocking out perhaps a dozen German tanks, but lost 57 Shermans. By noon, they were retreating. By mid-afternoon, they had ceased to exist as a fighting formation. The next day, Combat Command C tried to counterattack with 60 tanks. German anti-tank guns hidden in wadis destroyed them from 2,000 yards. Many American tank crews never even saw what fired at them. By February 16th, 100 American tanks had been lost in 2 days. Rommel observed from a command post near Sidi Bou Zid. He saw American armor advancing without infantry support. Artillery firing from exposed, static positions. Infantry stranded on hilltops with no escape. He dictated a blunt report. The Americans would need 6 months of combat before they could become a serious threat. The second disaster came at Spitla on February 17th. Major General Orlando Ward, commander of the 1st Armored Division, tried to mount a defense. Ward was experienced, competent, and methodical, but Rommel was too fast. By the time Ward positioned his forces, German armor was already flanking the town. He ordered a fighting withdrawal, but it turned into a chaotic rout. Vehicles clogged the roads heading west. German artillery annihilated trucks and half-tracks trapped in column. Drivers abandoned vehicles and scrambled for cover. One officer later described the scene as pure chaos. Nobody knew where friendly units were, nobody knew where the Germans were, and radio communications collapsed. Ward lost 40 tanks, 29 artillery pieces, 57 half-tracks, and the cohesion of his entire division. By nightfall, after only 4 days of combat, the 1st Armored Division had lost half its equipment. Survivors retreated toward Kasserine Pass, the final bottleneck before Tebessa. Rommel pursued relentlessly. Before dawn on February 19th, Rommel launched his assault on Kasserine Pass. The Afrika Corps struck from the south while elements of the 21st Panzer pushed from the north. His goal was simple: break both passes, converge on Tebessa, seize the supply base, and annihilate the US II Corps. The defense at Kasserine fell to Colonel Alexander Stark and his 26th Infantry Regiment. They had only minor combat experience. They had a few tank destroyers, some engineers, scattered artillery batteries, and a battalion of French colonial infantry armed with ancient World War I era 75mm guns. Stark placed his men on the heights overlooking the 2-mile-wide pass. If the Germans got through, nothing stood between them and Tebessa. The attack began with Stuka dive bombers, then artillery, then tanks pushing up the valley. The old French 75s fired at 4,000 yards and, despite their age, knocked out several German tanks. The first attack stalled. Rommel rushed forward in fury, berating his commanders for hesitating. He demanded speed, aggression, commitment. The next day, on February 20th, the German attack doubled in strength. They brought up 88mm guns firing in direct mode. The 88s tore through American positions, killing infantry, collapsing bunkers, destroying tanks long before they could fire back. By mid-afternoon, German infantry had infiltrated the heights on both sides, making Stark's line untenable. He ordered a withdrawal to Thala, 6 miles west. Kasserine Pass belonged to Rommel. The road to Tebessa lay open. Now Rommel faced a crucial decision. Attack northwest toward Thala, where British reinforcements gathered, or push west toward Tebessa, the juicy American supply base. He knew the supplies at Tebessa could prolong his campaign for months. But Berlin ordered him to take Thala. Rommel disagreed, but orders were orders. He split his forces, a decision that weakened both thrusts. And this is exactly when Paul Robinette entered the story. Paul Robinette was 49, a quiet, analytical officer from Missouri. He had served in the cavalry, worked staff jobs for decades, and earned respect for solving problems through planning rather than charisma. On February 19th, Robinette received terse, vague orders: take Combat Command B, move north, and establish a defensive position east of Tebessa. No one told him where. No one told him what strength of attack to expect. So he went forward himself in a jeep, studying every ridge, wadi, and contour. He needed ground where American forces, exhausted, demoralized, and battered, could finally fight effectively. He found it in the Bahire-Fusana Valley, a natural fortress of ridgelines, wadis, and open ground. The valley floor was flat and exposed, perfect for forcing German armor to advance across open killing fields. The ridges offered long-range observation for artillery. The wadis provided hull-down positions where Sherman tanks could hide with only their turrets showing. Infantry could hold the ridgelines and protect the tanks from close assault. And tight defile channeled any German advance into predictable routes that could be pre-registered for artillery fire. For the first time in the battle for western Tunisia, the Americans had a position that favored defense. Robinette placed his tanks in the wadis, hull down, invisible until they fired. He positioned his fragile tank destroyers forward as bait, to fire first, disrupt German formations, then fall back behind the Shermans. He arranged his artillery, 11 batteries, over 60 guns, in depth, with every likely German approach pre-registered. If a forward observer called for concentration 42, every gun knew the exact range and azimuth. Shells would land within seconds. He placed experienced infantry from the U.S. 1st Infantry Division along the flanks, where they could protect the tanks and prevent German infantry from infiltrating. And most importantly, he coordinated everything. On the night of February 20th, he gathered every commander together. He explained the map, the fire lanes, the fallback routes, the communication procedures. Everyone would have radio contact with everyone. If the Germans struck anywhere, the entire defense would react together. For the first time in this disastrous campaign, the Americans would fight as a single integrated team. Robinette walked among his men through the night. They were exhausted, shaken, worried. He explained the plan again and again, calmly, patiently, telling them the Germans would come at dawn, telling them the defense would hold if everyone stayed in position and trusted the system. At 4:50 on the morning of February 21st, the same time Robinette had chosen his ground the day before, German reconnaissance units probed the valley. They reported strong American defenses. Rommel decided to attack anyway. He believed American morale was broken and would shatter under pressure, as it had in the first days. But the attack didn't come at dawn. It came at 1,400 hours. 40 panzers from the 10th Panzer Division advanced in formation with Italian Bersaglieri infantry riding trucks behind them. They expected the usual: disorganized retreat, scattered resistance, panic. Instead, they ran into the forward line of American tank destroyers. The first shells slammed into German tanks at 1,500 yards. A few panzers caught fire. German gunners returned fire and knocked out several tank destroyers, but the Americans withdrew in good order, just as planned. Then the Shermans hidden in the wadis opened fire. The Germans had no idea they were there. Suddenly, panzers were being hit from multiple angles. Italian trucks tried to scatter, but American artillery crashed down on them in perfect, pre-registered concentrations. Trucks burned. Infantry scattered. The German advance stalled. Rommel rushed forward, shocked. These were not the panicked Americans he had destroyed days earlier. These troops were holding their ground and fighting in coordinated, integrated layers of fire. His casualties were rising. His fuel was running low. Ammunition was scarce. But Rommel was Rommel. He ordered another attack for the morning of February 22nd. More tanks. More infantry. Everything available. Break through to Tebessa. Fog delayed the attack until 11:25 a.m. When the panzers finally advanced, they made some progress, pushing within 2 miles of the American artillery lines. And then Robinette unleashed every gun he had. 11 artillery batteries, 132 guns, opened fire simultaneously on pre-registered targets. The valley floor turned into a furnace of steel. German tanks were shattered by direct hits. Italian Bersaglieri infantry were cut down by shrapnel. 2 Italian battalions were effectively destroyed in half an hour. The German attack collapsed. Rommel watched as the assault disintegrated. Reports reached him that Montgomery's 8th Army had advanced to the Mareth line in the south, threatening his flank. More reports arrived that Allied reinforcements were pouring into the region. At 1,600 hours on February 22nd, Rommel made the decision he had hoped never to make. He ordered a withdrawal. The Afrika Corps would retreat back through Kasserine Pass. The offensive was over. By February 25th, American and British forces reoccupied the pass. The battle had ended. The cost was staggering: 6,600 American casualties, 183 tanks, 104 half-tracks, 208 artillery pieces, and over 500 vehicles. It was the worst defeat the U.S. Army suffered in North Africa. But it was not the humiliating collapse Rommel had expected. In his journal afterward, he wrote something that startled his staff. He said the Americans had conducted themselves with skill, that they had recovered quickly after the first shock, and had dammed up the German advance by grouping their reserves to defend the passes. He praised American artillery. He praised their coordination. He noted that, once properly positioned and properly led, American troops fought well. This was not contempt. This was respect. Rommel had underestimated the Americans. Many German commanders continued to view them as amateurs. But Rommel had seen what happened east of Tebessa. He had seen how fast Americans learned. He had seen how quickly they adapted. And he knew that, from this point forward, the war in North Africa was changing, because the Americans were no longer the naive, disorganized force he had crushed at Sidi Bouzid. They were becoming dangerous.